How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me, as usual, is Leonard. This is a show about pro wrestling. And this week, we are returning to one of our favorite shows, which is Unstable Stables. And we will get to the rules of that in a little bit. But I want to have a teaser here of what we are going to do for our next show. And I say it here, Leonard, so that you can have some time to prepare for this. It's not as much hard work as you might think based on what I'm saying now, but the idea came to me. I forget where I saw it, whether it be a Reddit thread or a comment somewhere. What is the best event string, the best pay-per-view that's not one of the big four? Now we're sticking to WWE because if
so best WWE PP. So when we say that, do we mean like best individual show?
So no, that's why I'm glad you brought that up, because if you say individual show, then you're going to have a lot of people cite something like Canadian Stampede, for example, which certainly deserves credit for being a great pay-per-view on its own, but that was the only one. So we are going to do collectively, like say somebody wants to put Unforgiven as their best. I have no idea. I'm just throwing that name out there.
Question, does In Your House count?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that should count?
If In Your House counts,
then it would have to
that. Because I mean, I don't know how many In Your Houses there were. There were a bunch of them, and they all had like subtitles.
You know what? I would say no, because I don't think people checked into that based on the fact that it was in your house. Like It wasn't some, I will say this though, if there is a show that In Your House, one of the shows that you think is so far and above a great card that it deserves to be mentioned as the best, by all means.
Okay. So it would need to be a pay-per-view name that has been used more than once by WWE.
It doesn't have to be used more than once, but I mean, for the sake of argument, you might want to go with something that was used more than once.
Yeah. So, for example, I would say, let's say Unforgiven. I don't know how many Unforgivens there were. Let's say there were 5.
Right.
I would say that the 5 Unforgivens are the best string of pay-per-views that aren't the top 4. That's not That's not all the Royal Rumbles, all the WrestleManias, all the Survivor Series, all the SummerSlams.
Right. So the best pay-per-view event that you know by name, that if it's not still going, maybe you think it should still be going. I already know you're going to pick Great Balls of Fire. We don't even have to do the show, right, Leonard? You're going to pick
right. That's the best pay-per-view name of all time, Great Balls of Fire.
So anyway, we'll see if he and I come up with the same answer. I think it'll be interesting to see what we come up with.
And actually,
this doesn't require
pay-per-view that we're doing tonight with Unstable. No, just kind of basically maybe just looking at the card and seeing what was on the shows and figuring out from there. That's interesting. Yes. I will look into that. And oddly enough, we're calling our show tonight "Great Balls of Heenan." So
we should have. That's a great title. So Unstable Stables. So basically, what we've done in the past is the idea was we would take a faction or a stable, usually a larger one. We take all the members of said stable from the start to the finish of it, and Leonard and I draft them into teams that we manage. And based on that, we then assemble those wrestlers into a sort of fantasy card at the end that we predetermined as far as, 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, that sort of thing. So that's basically how we do it. And I'm going to put the rules up here as we go. But we have done, sometimes we don't do stables. Sometimes we'll do, early women's pre-revolution, stuff like that. We've done a lot.
Yeah, we did all the Kings of the Ring and all the runner-ups, the Kings of the Ring. And the last time we did this, it was the dying days of the AWA. So it was like the AWA Team Challenge Series was the last time.
Absolutely. And so this time I chose, because this is a show that usually Leonard has an idea like ready to go for this, but I realized we hadn't done it in a while, and I wanted to, choose one. And I was surprised at how large this stable really was, and that is the Heenan family. So we are only doing the first 10 years of the Heenan family. So pre-WWF, WWE Heenan family. And maybe a lot of you didn't know that it started before then. So obviously, this was a stable managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan. Beginning in the 1970s, he managed wrestlers under the name Heenan Family in American Wrestling Association, National Wrestling Alliance, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and eventually the WWF. He had joined the AWA in 1974 and started managing the team of Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens. He then would go on to have Bobby Duncombe Jr. I'm sorry, Bobby Duncombe Sr. rather,
yes,
join in the next year, and eventually the Blackjacks, and on and on. He would go to Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1979 for a year, and then he would return to the AWA from 79 through 84, and that is where he would make his jump to the WWF. And I am going to go over a list of the included stars here before we get to drafting. So we have Blackjack Lanza, Blackjack Mulligan, Bobby Duncombe Sr., Ken Patera, Mr. Saito, Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens, Stan Hansen, Super Destroyer Mark II, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr., Austin Idol, Bobby Jaggers, Ernie Ladd, Carl Cox, the Masked Superstar, Professor Toru Tanaka, Ron Bass, Angelo Poffo, Baron Von Raschke, Chris Markov, Jimmy Valiant, and Johnny Valiant. So, Leonard,
yes.
If either of us done our research, who gets to draft first? I believe it's me, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I did. I checked today. It is you.
All right. So, because I draft first, that means Leonard will get the first placement of matches later on. And to no shock, I'm going to go with Nick Bockwinkel as my first pick.
Yeah, I was going to be shocked if you didn't. Although I would have loved to have gotten him with the second pick. So I'm going to go with Stan Hansen.
That's, you know what? That's a real good one, because that was one, just like you said, if somebody hadn't picked him second, I certainly would have.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting list, though, Leonard, because there's some of these guys on here that, like, you recognize their names, but it's like tough to really tell, like, based on when they were with Heenan, if they were past their prime a little bit or not. Mm-hmm. But I am going to go with Super Destroyer Mark II as my second pick. And Leonard, why don't you tell everybody who that is?
Do I have to do that because you don't know?
No, I do know. It is Sergeant Slaughter.
Yes, yes.
So
I always love that name because it's such a complicated name. Like, why is he Super Destroyer Mark II?
It's convoluted in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's a great, but that was Sergeant Slaughter. So this is very early in his career. And, you know, a lot of people, our generation, I think, only know Sergeant Slaughter from G.I. Joe and from when he was the world champ there in 91. But he was an excellent worker early on in his career. You go find the boot camp matches that he did with Iron Sheik and Pat Patterson. And he was, I mean, he was a little green at this time, but good. That's an excellent choice. I had him in my top 5, and I was hoping that you would overlook him, not knowing that it was Sergeant Slaughter.
Yeah.
But you did your research. So I'm going to go with Big Cat Ernie Ladd.
All right.
Former NFL player, great talker, big dude, strong, powerful guy. This would have been, I think, right around, maybe right past his peak. But still very much could go in the mid 70s at this point.
All right. I am going to go with Ray Stevens.
Excellent pick. You know, one name I'm surprised it wasn't on the list was Pat Patterson, because I know that Ray and Pat were a tag team in the AWA, and perhaps Heenan didn't manage both of them.
Yeah, his name didn't come up on either of those lists.
Yeah.
So you might be right about that.
Yeah. So I know they were a tag team, but they must not have been when Heenan was there. That might have been an overlook. I'm gonna go with a guy. It would have been early on for him as well, but I think a guy that is underrated today, Austin Idol.
I was toying with Ray Stevens and Austin Idol, so that's interesting.
A lot of people said if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, that Vince McMahon would have gone with Austin Idol to be his lead guy to try to go national because he was, a muscular dude, bleach blonde hair, muscular, could talk on the mic, all this stuff. So, Austin Idol and he never really got a run in any of the big promotions. But if you go and you find some of his stuff, he was. I can't say. I would say he's better in the ring than Hogan in the U.S. Of course, we always put the Japanese asterisks on Hogan. But Austin Idol is who I'm going with next.
All right, so I am going to go with Blackjack Lanza.
Okay. Figured the Blackjacks would have been next for me. Lanza
was tag team partners with a couple people.
Yeah.
Throughout his career, but yes.
Yes. And I could chad you, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go with the Masked Superstar,
who is
Demolition Axe, also Bill Eadie.
That's right.
And this would have been at the prime of his career. When he became Axe, he was actually on the other side of his career. And it's interesting to note that he is not only still around today, but he still works matches.
I don't think I knew the latter. I knew he was still like a very consistent face on the convention circuit, though.
On the indie circuit, he still is around, and I haven't seen him wrestle, but I have seen him listed to wrestle. Him and Barry Darsow both within the past, few years. So.
All right. So I am going to, not pick Blackjack Mulligan right away here. I'm going to pick Mr. Saito.
Okay.
Who is Masa Saito, who legendary Japanese wrestler, also was AWA heavyweight champion at one time, and had a really prolific career in the United States as well. So.
And I am going to go with the other Japanese man on the list, Professor Toru Tanaka.
All right.
Who is, and correct me if I'm wrong because I forgot to look all this stuff up. He was Odd Job in the James Bond film Goldfinger.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So also a quite accomplished wrestler in Japan and the U.S. as well.
Yes, and that will make me go with Blackjack Mulligan next.
Okay. And I'm going to go with another guy early in his career, and that is Bob Orton Jr., son of Bob Orton Sr. and father of Randy Orton. And of course was, prime wrestler during the 80s for WWF, was a running buddy of Roddy Piper, was involved in WrestleMania 1 and all that, and seemed to perpetually have a cast on his arm.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to go with Bobby Duncombe.
So as you mentioned, his son, Bobby Duncombe Jr., wrestled for WCW, part of the West Texas Rednecks.
Yeah.
In the late 90s. I don't know a whole lot about Bobby Sr., other than I believe he also worked a cowboy gimmick.
Yes.
I'm going to go with Jimmy Valiant.
All right. And I'm going to chad you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. But I'm going to continue my run of some of the legends here by going with Killer Carl Cox.
Again, a name I know. I've heard the name. And I know he's a legend.
Hall of Fame. He's he was around a long time. He wrestled for the NWA and All Japan and WCW. He was NWA International Tag Team Champion with Cyclone Negro, and he wrestled in a lot of different territories. So
I'm going with Outlaw Ron Bass.
All right.
Again, another cowboy gimmick. It seems like Heenan had a lot of cowboy guys, either at the time or later on, because Ron Bass worked a cowboy gimmick in the WWF in the 80s.
And I would be kicking myself if I didn't go with Angelo Poffo, who is the father of Randall Poffo of the tag team we have in Fever Dream Wrestling with Terrence Bollea. But yes, Randy Savage's father, Angelo Poffo. Got to go with the patriarch.
Yes, and at one point he wrestled under a mask as the Miser because he was legendarily so cheap. And the other reason for that is he got older and he had like this old man head, but he had this totally jacked body. Like he still looked like a guy from the neck down in his 30s.
Yeah, so, and like the appearance that he made in WCW when Savage went there, like you could, even though he was much, much older, he was still a guy that was in good physical condition for his age.
I'm going with a guy I thought maybe you would have grabbed by now. I'm going to go with Ken Patera.
I thought about going with Ken Patera. I did. But, I don't know. I always thought Ken Patera was just a little bit overrated in his wrestling career. Based on the fact he was like on his Olympic credentials,
right?
Obviously, he very accomplished, athlete, but his wrestling career. I'm going to go with Baron von Raschke.
Okay. A stalwart of the AWA. And I'm going to go. I'm going to close out the tag team. I'm going to go with Johnny Valiant, who, again, our generation probably both knows best as a manager for the WWF. He managed the Dream Team of Bruce Beefcake and Greg Valentine, among others.
All right. So we're down to our last two, right, Leonard?
Yes.
And I am going to go with the guy that we talked briefly about before we got on here, which is Bobby Jaggers. And his nickname was Hangman Bobby Jaggers. And what I found interesting about this guy, Leonard, was the fact that he basically phased out his wrestling career because of the murder of Bruiser Brody, because apparently Jaggers was a stalwart in Puerto Rico at the time, but they were in separate dressing rooms because, one was a face and one was a heel. But after that incident happened, he decided that he was going to gradually stop doing it because it had such a profound impact on him, which anybody who's seen that episode of Dark Side of the Ring can understand why it would have had an impact, because the guys that were there certainly, you could tell on their faces. But anyway, so I found his story interesting. Great name. And that leaves you with one person. So, Leonard?
Right. So, Bobby Jaggers, I had heard of a little, like I knew the name. I didn't know a lot about him. The guy who I had no idea who he was at all was Chris Markoff.
Yeah.
And I didn't look up anything about him.
So, Leonard, Chris Markoff is a wrestler from Yugoslavia. And he is best known for his work in the Midwestern United States. And, he does have a bunch of championships under his belt. He was tag team champions with Harley Race in the AWA. He worked for Jim Crockett Promotions and was Mid-Atlantic tag team champions with Nikolai Volkov. He wrestled in a bunch of the different NWA branches. And he also was tag team champions in the World Wrestling Association with Angelo Poffo.
Oh.
So there you go. I did not know I was selecting another tag team there. But anyway, Chris Markoff. We're going to look for his t-shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees.
Yes. Maybe we can create one.
All right. So let's go over our stables again here. I have Blackjack Lanza, Blackjack Mulligan, Bobby Duncombe Sr., Mr. Saito, Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens, Super Destroyer Mark II, Bobby Jaggers, Carl Cox, Angelo Poffo, and Baron von Raschke. Leonard has Ken Patera, Stan Hansen, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr., Austin Idol, Ernie Ladd, Masked Superstar, Professor Toru Tanaka, Ron Bass, Chris Markov, Jimmy Valiant, and Johnny Valiant. All right, so we're going to start our card here, and the first matchup we have is a 3 versus 3 match, and Leonard has the first placement of wrestlers. So, Leonard, who are you selecting for your trio?
I'm going with the one and only Chris Markov. Bob Orton Jr. and the Masked Superstar.
All right. All right. So I am going to go with Angelo Poffo, Bobby Jaggers, and Bobby Duncombe Sr.
Okay, so two Bobbies.
Yeah.
Too bad there wasn't a third Bobby.
You know what? If I had Bob Orton Jr., I could have just called him the Bobs.
That's right. Oh, I'm sorry I took him now.
Yeah.
I would have if you had the 3 Bobs, I probably would have just gave it to you. It's like I can't defeat 3 Bobs. I mean, come on.
So you have Markov, Masked Superstar,
and Bob Orton Jr.
And Bob Orton Jr. So let me just, when you selected Bob Orton Jr., I concealed my thoughts. So Bob Orton Jr. obviously is a name we all know, but the reason we know Bob Orton Jr. has zero to do with anything he's accomplished in a match he was featured in. Other than, yes, he was in WrestleMania 1, but he, just tried to hit Hogan with his cast, and that was it. And then he was featured prominently during a time when Randy Orton was a heel, specifically his feud with The Undertaker. But nobody knows a lot, really, about Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. in the ring. He was a good hand in the ring, but, I feel like Angelo Poffo would have none of this mysterious cast stuff. That's just my opinion.
Well, the thing is I have 2 guys who have a lot of tag experience, the Masked Superstar and Bob Orton Jr. I have both these guys at early points in their career when they were younger. I think you're selling Bob Orton Jr. way short. He was a great hand in the ring who had a very long and lengthy career. It's just that, unfortunately, he was kind of known for more of the side work that he did than any of his matches, but was certainly, a good hand in the ring. The only, Markov is the weak guy on my team, I think. Poffo is certainly, I think, the strongest guy on your team. But again, this is an older Angelo Poffo. This is at a point where
it is.
Both of his sons were adults. I think Laney was wrestling at this point. Randy was playing baseball, but both adults. Jaggers and Duncombe, as we said, we don't know a whole lot about.
Jaggers and Poffo were tag team champs.
Okay, which you did find out.
I knew about that for years, but that's beside the point.
Don't you have like a VHS tape, like the best of Jaggers and Poffo?
I do. I'll get it out later. But no, yes. So, I would say Jaggers and Markov are our 2 weak links here. Mm-hmm. I have 2 older guys. You have, Bill Eadie as the Masked Superstar. One could argue that he wasn't in his peak there, but you know what? I'll say that this would probably be a pretty even match. We could continue arguing about this, but I will give your guys the edge based on youth. How about that?
All right. Thank you much. I appreciate that. Because I wasn't sure where I was going to go next. So that'll work.
Right.
All right. 1 versus 1 is and you get the seed first.
All right. So this is a 1-on-1 match, and I am going to pick Killer Carl Cox.
Okay. Killer Carl Cox is going to get, as I look at my list here, you know what? I know how you feel about him already, but I'm going to give you Ken Patera.
This would be a bit of a, well, I don't know, maybe a bit of a clash of styles. I think, you have a guy who's more old school, more, I would say brawling in Carl Cox.
Mhm.
And then you have Ken Patera, who, was more of the strong man for obvious reasons. So this was really early on in Ken Patera's run and really late in Carl Cox's run, but only one is a killer, Leonard. So that's my argument. Carl Cox is in the Hall of Fame. I feel like Ken Patera would be happy to do the job here.
Yes, as you mentioned, it's two guys. Youth got me the first match, but yeah, I think experience gets this one. I think, Cox again, and all these guys too who kind of came up through that era. Dudes like Carl Cox and Luthez and Vern Gagne and Killer Kowalski and all these dudes, like they wrestled forever.
Yeah.
And were still really good very late in their careers because of their mat-based technical style. And
Right.
again, this is very early on in Ken Patera's career. I think you're selling Ken Patera short, but I definitely think that Cox would go over Patera in this scenario.
All right. So our next match is 2 versus 2, and it is a tornado tag team match. So Leonard, you get the first placement here.
I'm going to give you the Valiant brothers, Jimmy and Johnny.
All right. And I am going to give you Baron von Raschke and Ray Stevens.
Okay. To my knowledge, non-natural tag team in Baron
I have the Baron von Raschke and Ray Stevens VHS as well.
Yes, the best of. But I don't believe a natural tag team. So the best of a mismatch there. The Valiant brothers are a natural tag team. The Valiants were again. This is kind of pre-TV, but from what I know, the Valiants, they were very very accomplished, very well regarded tag team. Of course, both of them went on to have kind of separate careers. Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant still is around today and does indie shows. I think the fact that I have the fact that it's a tornado tag, I think makes this very interesting. But I think the Valiant Brothers as a natural tag team are going to be able to work that stipulation better. I think they're going to be able to isolate one of the guys while having one of the others out. I think Stevens and Raschke are going to be clashing in not only their style, but their personalities. Raschke, I never thought much of. Stevens, I think, is one of those guys who's underrated today because he was, did a lot of stuff pre-TV or, local TV for the AWA Minnesota. But I'm going with my brothers. I'm going with the Valiant Brothers.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue with you here. I really didn't have another tag team to choose from here. And, I kind of had to be wise with who I've selected because I'm saving some of my other guys for other things. But, Baron von Raschke was like the consummate loner in terms of being in the ring. I'm sure he had tag team partners, but he was much more known for just being on his own in one-on-one matches. And
I think later on when they were both older, I believe Baron von Raschke and the Crusher were a tag team. I believe later on in the like the mid to late 80s when they were still there.
Yeah, and Ray Stevens had a lot of tag team partners through the years. Baron von Raschke was not one of them. But both of these guys are really good. But yeah, in terms of being in a tag team match, especially a tornado tag team match, one could argue that Baron von Raschke and Ray Stevens would probably, it would be a little bit too chaotic for them, maybe. So I'll give the Valiant Brothers the win there.
All right.
And our next match is one-on-one inside of a steel cage. And I am going to give you Mr. Saito.
Mr. Saito. Well, who I wanted to use here was I was going to use Big Cat Ernie Ladd, but since you used Mr. Saito, I want to see him go against Professor Toru Tanaka.
And this would be an awesome match because, whether or not people know, in Japan, as much as they're known for, strong style and really good technical matches, they're not known for gimmicks. You don't see a lot of gimmicks used. And so I'm sure Mr. Saito was in his fair share because of his run in the States. But yeah, this would be two guys really trying to show each other up in terms of how much can you take.
Yeah,
this would be
and in a cage too.
Yeah,
I mean, this would be today, I think, considered like a hidden classic. I think because the time period this would be happening, it wouldn't be really on a lot of people's radar. But people like in the know would be like, hey, you need to go check out this cage match from *75 between Saito and Tanaka. It's insane. I could see them just being very brutal, chops, kicks, a lot of that Japanese strong style that you mentioned, but using the cage in sparing but good ways, like sending guys in the cage. I don't know if either guy was bleeders, but I think we could get some blood here. I think this is a hell of a match. When you took Saito, I took Tanaka because I wanted to put them against each other if I didn't have them as a tag team. And the fact that it's in the steel cage, I think makes this even better.
Yeah, and I mean, you can just hear people. You remember the guy from James Bond? Did you know he was in a cage match?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, plus these guys are both, built similarly.
Yeah.
So that would make it interesting in and of itself. In terms of bleeding, I do believe Saito was in quite a few matches where he bled. Toru Tanaka, I do not know. But based on impact alone, I would have to give this to my guy.
So. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think this is a close match. I mean, you can't have a draw in a cage match, really, unless Vince Russo's booking it somehow. So yeah, I would go with Saito, however we say his name. I would go with him here because I think his career was at least in the States, a little bit better. I know he's a legend all over the world. But this again is a match of anything we've booked so far, the one I would most want to see on the card.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Our next match is 2-on-2, and it is for the Heenan Tag Team Championship, and Leonard gets first choice.
I may surprise you a little bit here. I'm going to go with my ass-kicking cowboy I almost said condom combo of Stan Hansen and Ron Bass.
I like that tag team, and we know that it would be a what does Jim Ross call it? A slobber knocker.
Slobber knocker.
They would be going up against Blackjack Lanza and Blackjack Mulligan, the Blackjacks. Stan Hansen is notoriously very tough in the ring. He was somebody that had a really big career in Japan and had runs in WCW and the territories. And I know that Hogan wanted to bring him in to WWF on a number of occasions, and it just didn't happen. He is the guy that you see Zeus beating the hell out of in No Holds Barred. So Stan Hansen is a hell of a name. But would he mesh with his tag team partner as much as the Blackjacks meshed together?
I made the meshing argument earlier on with the Valiant, and I gotta let you have that here too. I like the idea of putting the two cowboy characters together. I'm gonna call them the Concrete Cowboys. Is what I'm gonna call them.
I like that.
And they're, again, Bass, I always viewed as kind of being a knockoff Stan Hansen, a B-grade Stan Hansen. We can't get Stan Hansen, we're going to use Ron Bass. Hansen is legendary. I mean, if he had come around a little bit, if he was a little bit younger, maybe, I think he would have been doing the Terry Funk stuff, like the hardcore crazy crap in Japan, working with Mick Foley. I think he'd be doing that. There are some excellent, really, really balls out Stan Hansen matches. There's one against him and Andre the Giant in Japan from 80, 81, maybe 82. That's excellent. When we were looking at, I think, at the matches of the 80s, that episode that we did, I found that and looked at it. And so that's great. But the question comes down to, can Stan Hansen would beat Mulligan or Lanza individually, I think.
Yes.
Can he beat them together with a mini-me version of himself?
Yeah.
And this should have been in a cage. I think this would have been a hell of a cage match
Oh
too.
yeah, absolutely. This
This
would have been a
thing.
good cage match. And yeah, I mean, thinking about it, just on a side tangent here, Leonard, I honestly don't know if Hansen's style would have fit with the WWF when Hogan was on top, because
True.
like Hansen, for a lot of people who may not know, like was damn near blind, and when he would throw his patented lariat, like it would land flush, because he often didn't know how close people were. And he had a lot of bloody, really kind of knockdown, drag out, brawl type matches, which is certainly not what the WWF was doing in the 80s. So as much as it would have been cool to see, I don't know if it would have fit. But anywho, what do you think, Leonard? Do you agree with that, or you think it would have?
No, I'd definitely give you the I'll give you the Blackjacks for the win. And yeah, I don't think Hansen, because if you look at a few of, like, Blackjack Mulligan was actually there in '86 at the
Right.
very end of his career. And it was such a footnote. No one really gave him, much credit. They had Dick Slater. Was it Dick Slater or Dick Murphy? No, Dick Slater, I think, was there for a little bit too in the mid '80s. So they did have some Southern characters, cowboy characters at the time, but it wasn't really their style, their type of character, type of in-ring style. And so, I don't think Hansen would have worked. But Hansen's a true legend. Seek him out if you don't know him. So if I could have two Stan Hansens against the Blackjacks, this would be, I think, a tougher bout to call. But no, I'm gonna give it to you and the Blackjacks.
All right. So I realize now what our next one-on-one match will be, and it does not look good for me. So the next is just a regular one-on-one match, and I get first pick, and it is Super Destroyer Mark II. And I know exactly who you're going to pick for this, so go ahead.
Well, do you? I'm going with Ernie Ladd.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about an early Sergeant Slaughter versus the big cat Ernie Ladd. And whereas I think this would be a good match, Ernie Ladd was still very much a big name and, very much respected in the ring and behind the scenes as far as that goes. So, I think this would be a good match. If this was Slaughter versus Ernie Ladd, like, I probably would make a different argument here. But, I can't see Ernie Ladd doing the job for Super Destroyer Mark II. So
no, I agree with you. I think this would be a really good underrated match. And I think Super Destroyer would bump crazy for Ernie Ladd. You know what I always like about Slaughter is that head first bump he would do into the turnbuckles.
Yeah.
And then he would either just flop like a pancake, or he would, like, go over. When he was younger, he would go over. I always loved that. I think he would bump like crazy for Ernie Ladd in this thing. Ernie wasn't that far past his prime in the mid '70s. Was a big dude, big name. I think underrated in the ring. Wrestled definitely a power wrestling style. Was sort of one of those jive talking guys. Another name I'll throw at you as a side note is Thunderbolt Patterson. Not nearly as good in the ring as Ladd, but a hell of a talker on the mic. And Dusty Rhodes took a lot from Ladd and Patterson in his vocal stylings and his promo stylings. I think this is a good underrated match. If it was early '80s Sergeant Slaughter versus Ernie Ladd, I think Slaughter gets him. At this point, I believe, name value, name power, Ernie Ladd.
All right. We are in agreement there. And so that means our main event is for the Heenan Heavyweight Championship, which I feel like is a belt that somebody could design, by the way.
Yes.
And Leonard gets first pick, so I know who you have left, but go ahead and tell everybody.
I've got the Universal Heartthrob, Austin Idol.
And I have Nick Bockwinkel, Heenan's first talent that he managed, and gentleman who was AWA heavyweight champion multiple times. So this is a great main event anywhere in the country. I feel like these two guys would put on a wrestling clinic. Nick Bockwinkel was very good in the ring. I know that there was a time there where, he was kind of the AWA guy, and politics, would get involved. He had feuds with Hogan and whatnot, and Kurt Hennig, and, he was like the Flair of that territory. Is probably the best way I could describe it. So this is a matter of, how do you want the fans to go home? So who would the heel here be? Probably Bockwinkel, but
I think it would be Bockwinkel. I mean, Bockwinkel, much like Flair, as you mentioned, I think worked better as a heel. I think his promo style, his in-ring style, he had his biggest highs as a heel. Idol was a good heel, a very solid heel, but the way I picture this in my head, when we were laying out the card, when I figured I was going to use Hansen and Bass together. If not, I would have gave you Stan Hansen. So it would have been Hansen and Bockwinkel, which I think is more of a styles clash, but a hell of a contest. But Idol, I was thinking, as I mentioned, he was a runner-up to Hogan possibly if Vince couldn't get Hogan. So I think he's the blonde, muscular baby face. And again, I think Idol is a better in-ring worker than Hogan was, at least in the States from what I've seen.
Right.
And this is during a real prime for him. He was on the way up at this point in his career. So I think this would be a really good match. But yeah, I don't think you can. So yeah, do you want to send the fans home happy and have Idol be the world champion? As we know what happened when Hogan didn't win, or he won on the lame Dusty finishes.
Right. Which they eventually recognized.
Yeah.
As legit title wins. He had two of them. But I digress. Yeah, I mean, this would be a great main event, and this is a match that I would like to see. And based on the fact that you put him in the main event, I have to go out of my way to look at some Austin Idol matches, because I confess that although I do know about his career, I don't think I've seen any of his matches.
I couldn't name really anything off the top of my head. I know he did some great work in Memphis, and he did work, I believe, for the AWA at one point, and again, was never in WCW, never in WWF. I think that's why he's a name that doesn't really get the props he deserves today. But really an awesome talent, one of those ahead of his time talents as far as the look and the presentation and all that. It seems odd, like you're kind of leaning towards Austin Idol, and I feel like I'm leaning more towards Nick Bockwinkel.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go with Bockwinkel, certainly, just because of, I think that he's overall better in the ring. And, I can see him being the heel champion that they'd want a face to chase, which is what happened a lot of times in AWA. So yeah, I'd have to go with Bockwinkel here, but I think fans would be happy based on the quality of the contest.
Yeah, I think this could be a very long match, and a match would be very well put together with Bockwinkel leading the way. And I mean, overall, I think this is a pretty decent card that we put together based on these guys. The first half is but everything from the steel cage match on is fire. I think this is a really good card. And Absolutely. That gives you the win 4-3.
4-3. It was very close. I feel like early on when we did this, there was one or two blowouts for both of ours sakes.
Yes.
But like lately it's been pretty close.
Yeah. I think maybe it just means we've been better at not only picking talent, but matching the talent.
Yes. And like I realized when we were in that tornado tag match, because I was the one that picked a tornado tag as the stipulation.
Yeah.
And I realized then, I was like, I have nobody to pick as a tag team because I can't give him the tag team I want to give, like I have, which is the Blackjacks. I can't put them here because that wouldn't make sense.
But, yeah, because anyone else you would put against Hansen and Bass, I think I win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that is our part one of our Heenan Family Unstable Stables.
And here's the thing, I'll say this too, when we do part two, I think the tag champs of part two and the world Heenan champ of part two, they should go against the winners of part one.
And the winner of the main event should be the Heenan family president. That's
Mhm.
Something. We could think of a better title. Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. I think that'll sound like fun. And so, yes, there will be a part 2 of this in a couple weeks. Next week, we are going to be talking about non-Big Four pay-per-views. Because, like I said, if you include WCW, the easy answer there is like Starrcade or Great American Bash or something to that effect.
Yes, if you went to WCW, I was thinking about that. But no, this is something I'll need to do some research on. I will not include In Your House.
Right.
But I will look at some of the other names.
I think there are a couple In Your House events where the names of that event did continue.
I believe you are correct, and in that case, I would consider that if the subtitle carried on, I would consider that. Yes.
So I look forward to doing that, and let us know what you think about our Heenan Family picks 1974 to 1984. Again, I was surprised to see how long this name was used before he ended up in the WWF. And some of the guys that he managed, I think it's really fascinating. Go out of your way to check out his Hall of Fame speech if you haven't seen it. It's one of the best ever.
Yeah.
So let us know your thoughts, and please comment, hit the like button, check out our podcasts. They are available wherever you listen to podcasts. And for Leonard, my name is Chad. We will see you next week, and Alexa will see you out.